So welcome everybody to Historical Inquiry with GHS. I am Lisa Landers. I'm the Education Coordinator at the Georgia Historical Society. And my host today is my colleague Sheila Boone. And so as we're going through the different slides and the different parts of our inquiry, if you have any questions, you're welcome to provide those or put those into the chat, and Sheila will take care of that, and we can definitely look at those at the end. So we are going to be talking about historical inquiry in the classroom through the lens of and that's the way it is, television, and the Cold War Inquiry Kit. This is brand new for this year. In fact, you guys are going to be the very first to see this outside of our office. So, so that is an exciting, so that's exciting for you guys. And I'm going to be going over all the various parts. I also want to make sure that you know that this is recorded. So we are going to be recording this, and we can provide it for you later. But just so you know what's going on. And finally, I want to thank PNC Bank, who's provided the funding for this program. So we just want to give them a shout out and appreciate their support. So this is our agenda for today. I'm gonna briefly talk about the Georgia History Festival, which is a program that we do every year at GHS. I'm gonna talk about the benefits of historical inquiry as well, and why we choose to do those types of this type of resources. We're going to share with you the link to our brand new resource, and that's the way it is, the Television and the Cold War Inquiry Kit. And I'm going to go over the inquiry design model briefly with you. That's not something you're familiar with. It's by C3 Teachers, which is a partner of Teaching with Primary Sources and the Library of Congress. And then we will review each part of this inquiry kit. And so as we go through, you're welcome to ask questions, and I will be sharing strategies for inquiry in the classroom. A little background on the Georgia Historical Society. If you are not familiar with us, we are a research and education institution located in Savannah, Georgia, and we are responsible for one of the oldest and largest collections of Georgia history. Each year, we host the Georgia History Festival, which is our major K-12 program that starts in September with the beginning of a new school year and culminates in February, which is ultimately the founding month of the Georgia colony. Every year, there's a focus of study. And this year for the 2020-2021 festival, we have chosen to focus on Tear Down This Wall, Georgia in the Cold War America. So that is our theme for this year, and that's really how we've come to provide this resource for teaching television and the Cold War. At the end of this presentation, I will also share with you some upcoming programming we have for GHF later in November. All right, so here's what we're really after today, historical inquiry. And what I'm going to show you today is really about the Cold War and different events in the Cold War. But I want to also encourage you to think about the strategies that we talk about today as things that you can apply into your classroom outside of this particular resource as well. So it's something that you could do with any content in your classroom. If you are new to historical inquiry, it's not something you've really done before, I would definitely encourage you to start small and kind of build from there. This is certainly a large resource and can be overwhelming to someone who is not familiar with the inquiry design model. And so what I'm going to try to do for you today is try to mitigate that, how big it is, and help you to understand it a little bit better, but also just know that this is something that you can break down into pieces as well. So historical inquiry is important because it supports the development of critical thinking skills for students. It really asks students to be the investigators in history, not just reading something from the book, but actually doing the investigation themselves. So trying to support skills like reasoning and analyzing evidence and problem solving. You will see that through this historical investigation, we are providing you with primary source sets. Each aspect of this, each activity in this resource comes with its own primary source set. And we use primary source sets because it allows for us to explore multiple points of view on a topic rather than a single narrative view that might be more from a traditional history class. Historical inquiry is so important to student engagement because it's all about getting students to ask their own questions, be curious, but also develop the skills to answer those questions. So instead of teachers being the person giving the content and responsible for facts and dates, it takes and it puts you in the position of being the expert you are and facilitating learning for your students. So you're helping them develop skills, which we will look at a bunch of different skills today, to be able to do those historical investigations. And ultimately those skills like critical thinking and problem solving translate into other parts of a student's life and other subjects. And finally, really help students to become effective communicators, because the whole point of this is to craft evidence-based arguments, is to look for evidence and be able to use that evidence from primary sources to build an argument to respond to a question. This resource is based on the inquiry design model. It is from, as I said, C3 Teachers, which is a partner with the Teaching with Primary Sources and the Library of Congress. There are many parts to a C3 inquiry, and that's why I say it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm going to just give you a brief overview here, and then we will also look more deeply at each one of these within this particular resource. Starts with a compelling question. Compelling questions are always open-ended. There's something that requires study and research to be able to respond to. So the question for this resource is, how was the Cold War shaped by television? So as you noted in the title, and that's the way it is of course Walter Cronkite, and we're really looking at the technologies, television, the rise of mass media, and how that affected and shaped events of the Cold War. Not only the events of the Cold War, but Americans during that time as well. In order to help students understand the compelling question, the first activity in this resource is staging the question. This is where we really frame the compelling question for students. We've chosen to do that through the Butter Battle book by Dr. Seuss, which is an allegory of the Cold War, written specifically that way, and helps to frame the Cold War for young learners. It really helps to explain maybe some difficult ideas of war related to warfare to students through an allegory. Then you will have, there are supporting questions and formative tasks. This is where your strategies are really going to come through. So we're going to look at some specific strategies for historical inquiry and looking at primary source sets. Most inquiries based on the inquiry design model come with 3 supporting questions and formative tasks. This one has 3, and it will cover the Vietnam War, the space race, and the civil rights movement. And I will be talking about each one of those things, and we'll get a little bit deeper in that in a few minutes. Then the next portion is the summative assessment. And this is where you're going to be able to assess your students overall once they have done all of the activities. And this is where they're going to build that argument, that evidence-based argument, to respond to the compelling question, which is, how was the Cold War shaped by television? And then finally, we take it a step further out of just what did the students learn, and we have them try to apply the skills they've developed through practicing the various strategies and apply that to something going on around them today. So they basically practice what they learned. So we take it beyond just what they've learned and trying to figure out and assess what they've learned, but also see if they can take and apply those skills elsewhere. All right, so here we have what to expect, and this is just a brief to give you an idea of what are students doing and what are they supposed to be doing in a resource like this. Students, of course, will engage in each task. As I said, there are 5 parts to this inquiry. So there are 5 different activities that they can engage in. They'll be gathering evidence from primary sources to respond to questions. Each activity has a set of primary sources and a suggested, what we call a formative performance task or a strategy for you guys, to answer each question that comes along with the formative performance tasks. The great thing about each formative performance task, which will cover the Vietnam War, the space race, and the civil rights movement, is that you don't have to necessarily wait to the summative assessment to assess your students in this resource. You can actually assess them after each performance task. And I will show you that as we go forward. And then ultimately, we will ask students to build an argument to answer the compelling question. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual resource itself. I am going to ask my colleague Sheila to drop into the chat a link to this resource online. This is something that we have put on our website, and it is brand new. In fact, you guys are the first members of the public to see it. You're the first teachers to see it. We will be sharing this with everybody else tomorrow, but we are excited for you to see it. So if you will go to that link, if you'd like to follow along online while I'm going through these slides, you are welcome to do that, and that's what that link is there for. We will also follow up this program with some information for you, which would include links to everything that I talk about today. So if you don't get it right now, we will send it in a follow-up email as well. So an inquiry, a C3 inquiry is meant to build upon itself. So starting with the staging the question, you can see that down here, and this is a screenshot from the main page of that link that you were just given. So ultimately, it's meant to build on itself. Start with the staging the question, move through the Vietnam War, to the space race, to the civil rights movement, then ultimately ending with your taking informed action. But I think it's important to note that each one of these activities can absolutely stand on its own. You do not have to do all of them. You certainly don't have to do all of them right away, back to back. You could take time. Or if you're just interested in the Vietnam War or the space race, you could use that as a standalone. It doesn't have to be done with everything else. I always encourage teachers to if you want to do what we have suggested and what we've given you, through this resource, great. You can absolutely go step by step and do exactly what we have suggested. But you know your students, you're the experts in who your students are. And so it's so important that if you don't like the way that we've laid it out, please adapt it to your own classroom. If there are too many primary sources in the set and you feel like it's overwhelming, choose 1 or 2. I think that always starting smaller first is useful and then kind of building out from there. So if you've opened up that link, if you look, this is the kind of the page is another screenshot you've seen. If you will look under the title, below the standards of excellence there, you will see a blue bar. And this is where you can download the teacher guide. This is the section that is for you. It will basically talk about everything I'm talking about today, plus more. It is quite a large document because we think it's important that when you're teaching with primary sources, you have that background knowledge on what this primary source is and where it comes from. It is very difficult to teach with primary sources if you don't know anything about the source itself, because what makes it interesting is when students become curious about it and ask questions. And if you can't help respond to those questions or help them find the answers, then it just isn't interesting anymore. So you can download the teacher guide right here. It's a PDF. We will send this link for you as well. I think, Sheila, I also gave you a link for that. If you want to just put that in the chat to go directly, it'll take you directly to the teacher guide. You can drop that in there as well. So like I said, this is the portion that is for you. If you click on any one of the boxes below, you can kind of see they're peeking up here. The staging the question, the Vietnam War, you will see, so for example, if you go to the Vietnam War page, you will see that this is student instructions. So these pages are created for students. This is where they can follow the instructions directly, and I'll show you what's below. Of course, you can also do this, you can have students online following these instructions, whether they're remote, whether they're in your classroom, but if they're using a computer, they can do it directly online. Or you can also do it in the classroom through the instructions that we've provided on the teacher guide, which are pretty much the same. This is also meant to be online, or I'm sorry, interactive as well. So yes, this is something, most of our resources are already online, but we wanted to try to create this interactive element. So if you scroll down below the student instructions, you'll see that there's a list of primary source sets. We'll have number 1, number 2, number 3. This are primary sources. This is your primary source set. This is the one for the Vietnam War. If you click the plus sign over here on the right-hand side of the page, you will see that it will give you a drop down, and then you have your source, your image, or whatever it is, plus source information. So it gives you a little bit of background, a little bit of information about who made this, the who, what, when, where, and why. Who made it, where is it from, when was it made, and so on, which is really crucial to teaching with primary sources. If you want to know more information about this particular image, then this is where you will go to your teacher guide. And in the teacher guide, there's more context for you specifically written for adults. So you can have some more context and more background. And I believe this image is the signing of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution by Lyndon Johnson. If you don't either want to do this as an interactive lesson online, it is also possible to do this as a hands-on lesson in your classroom, because we have provided PDFs. If you go back to the top of that page above the student instructions, you can see that we have provided a PDF of each one of the primary source sets. So here you could print it out, and you could actually have students looking at pieces of paper if you would like. This is where you would need to bring in and make sure you have your teacher guide or come to these pages to know what the instructions are, but you can download the primary sources, and you of course have the instructions in the teacher guide. Real quick, as we always want to show our Georgia Standards of Excellence for this resource, this is written for 5th grade US history. The reason we chose to do that is because we felt like the Cold War really lends itself to an American history topic rather than just a Georgia history topic. But I will also encourage anyone that's not teaching 5th grade, if you want to use that, these can be utilized in many different subject areas and many different classrooms. So I would suggest it for middle school and high school as well if you are teaching any of these topics. But ultimately, these are the standards and the information processing skills that we have tried to aim for. Okay, so now I'm going to get into kind of the meat of our resource and talk more specifically about strategies. And so if you want to follow along online, you are welcome to do that. And I'm going to be on the staging the question section. So the purpose of the staging the question is to introduce major themes of whatever we're learning about, the vocabulary, the topics, specifically related to the Cold War. The Cold War, we know, has some difficult themes when it comes to things like warfare. And so, like I said earlier, we've chosen to look at that through the Butter Battle book, which is an allegory. Students will match primary sources from the Cold War to characters in the Butter Battle book. So that's what I'm going to talk about for you today. This staging the question, which is staging the question of how has television impacted the Cold War, starts with a close reading of a short passage of about the Cold War. Most likely students are not going to know what a lot of the words mean, especially those that are specific to the Cold War. So we've also provided a Cold War vocabulary document. So students do a close reading of that passage. Then they use the Cold War vocabulary document to underline or circle the words that they don't know, and then use that Cold War vocabulary document to define those terms, and then come back to the passage and reread it for better understanding. And hopefully this provides a little background for them to understand what is the Cold War, just a brief introduction. Next, we'd have them read or watch the Butter Battle book by Dr. Seuss. While they are either, and I love the idea of reading this in class with through the Dr. Seuss book, but this is also available for free on SchoolTube. The cartoon version of it is available, and that we've provided that link on the student instructions and in the teacher guide. So you can read it or you can watch it. And we want students to be thinking about what are the differences between the characters. And if you're not familiar with this, it is between the yooks and the zooks. And they're arguing over whether or not it's better to butter your bread on the top or on the bottom. So the yooks and the zooks are our main characters. They're arguing over which side of the bread to butter, and the argument escalates. As students are watching or reading, we want them to think about what are the similarities and the differences of the two groups. We want them to think about the different characters that they're seeing and the events that they're seeing. They'll see a wall being built. They'll see the arms race through new weapons being built bigger and bigger and bigger. In arguing over this idea of which side of the bread should be buttered, which one is better. From there, students will do some primary source analysis. They're going to look at the primary source set for this particular activity, and they're going to match characters and symbols from the Butter Battle book to primary sources. So for example, here's one of the pages. So here we have the yooks and the zooks. We have the wall that divides them that they started to build between themselves. They're arguing over which side of the bread to butter is better. And we want students to take our primary sources and match them to the characters here. So as we see on the right-hand side, this is from the source information below, and you can do from analysis, that we're looking at a primary source that illustrates the wall. So the students would match the wall from the Butter Battle book to this primary source. And there is a key in your teacher guide. One really important thing to think about is if you have your students done primary source analysis before. Have you asked them to analyze a primary source like this one on the right-hand side, our watchful communist border guard? If not, the best place to start for primary source analysis, I think, is the primary source analysis tool from the Library of Congress. And we have a link for that. So Sheila, if you're ready, you can put that in the chat. We'll take you straight. And this document is helpful because it asks students to observe, reflect, and question. So they're going to observe the details of the primary source, which includes the source information, which you see below. It's very important that you talk to your students about source information. That's always the first thing I teach. The who, what, when, where, and why. Who made it? What is it? Where did it come from? When did it come from? And so on. They can use the source information and what they see in the document or the photograph in their observation. Then they think about what they've seen and what that tells them. What do they already know? And from there, they can start to either, you could have them write questions, or you could have them write here. It could be observe, reflect, question. It can also be observe, reflect, write. The Library of Congress has a great, you can print this out, but you can also do a fillable version online, which is also great. So the primary source analysis tool is going to be your best friend. If you've never done primary source analysis in your classroom, start here, and you can use this tool throughout this resource. And once you've used this tool a few times with your students, they will start to do this naturally. They'll start to know what to do, and they'll do it automatically. It just takes practice. So moving into our first formative supporting task. Now we're going to look at the Vietnam War and public opinion. The supporting question here is, how did news coverage influence or reflect public opinion toward the Vietnam War over time? So remember that our compelling question, our main question is, how has television impacted the Cold War? So now we're kind of drilling down and we're looking at something specific within that idea and looking at news coverage and how it impacted public opinion related to the Vietnam War. The task here is to create a timeline of the Vietnam War and to assess public opinion and how it changed over time. And I'm calling that our change over timeline. And essentially that's just working on a chronological skill. Creating a timeline, they can do that online. There are different apps for that. They can do it in a notebook. You could do it as a class. Here, they are going to be able to, in the teacher guide and in the instructions, they're given dates to put on their timeline. We've given you some background in each one of those events that goes on the timelines just to help you out. And then now they're reviewing specific key events that are covered in the standards for the Vietnam War. The next thing that we want them to do is do their primary source analysis. We're going to do that through the what makes you say that strategy. But before I get into that, one of the things that you're going to want to do is have your students put the sources in the primary source in order of time. Look at them over time, compare them to the timeline, and look for those changes. In order to do their primary source analysis, you can always use that tool I just showed you, or you can do the what makes you say that strategy, which is a great strategy for elementary school students, even quite young students. The idea here is that they are going to be using evidence-based reasoning. That's our skill here. So we have this image over here. You've got your source information down here, which is a part of it, which is always what I try to encourage teachers to make sure students are paying attention to. And just start with what's going on in this picture. And they may come back with all kinds of different answers. There's filming going on in this picture. All right, what makes you say that? Well, I see a camera and I see a microphone and it looks like an interview or a discussion. So looking for that evidence-based reasoning. They describe what they see. You ask them, what makes you say that? They're giving you evidence. There it is. It's a very simple, very easy way to start getting students to understand what evidence is. This is something that it can do in a small group, in a pair, or a whole group. I love the idea of putting these primary sources around your room, printing them out and putting them around doing a gallery walk. But you could also have them do it interactive online. I've included a technology tip here because the what makes you say that strategy is really, I think, most effective when you have a free-flowing conversation and you don't have to stop and write things down. It's important that students are noting their evidence and paying attention to what they're saying. You can always have them write that down, but I love the idea of recording their conversation or recording what's going on. And that can also work for if they're working remotely. Now, also, consider privacy concerns through your school, always when you're recording, but I like the idea of being able to record this conversation or what students might say and have either you go back and listen to their skills or have them go back later and listen to themselves, citing evidence and helping them understand what it means to find evidence and how that helps them understand what's going on. It's really a very fast thing in their brain that they're doing automatically, but we want to make sure that they can see that they see that they're pointing out evidence and understand what that means. The next activity or formative supporting task is exploring motives in the space race. Here we're going to be looking at the different motives of the Americans and the Soviets in the space race, and our supporting question is, why was the space race not really about space? The strategy we're going to have them do is going to be basically sorting and analyzing primary sources, but to compare and contrast motives in the space race. We provided a primary source video we'll have the students watch first. It's called The Space Race History, Red's Orbit to Craft from 1962. And this is it's about a minute-and-a-half long video that talks about the space race and really gets students thinking about, why was it a competition? Why do we call it a race? For primary source analysis, they will look at the primary source set for the space race and sort the primary sources into 2 different categories. You can do this via a Venn diagram or a T-chart. And they're going to sort into 2 categories, those categories being ones made by primary sources from the American point of view and primary sources from the Soviet point of view. This is where it's so important that that source information comes into play, because they might not be able to tell from the source itself who made it. The source information will give them that clue, that who, what, when, where, and why of the primary source. Compare the 2 piles. What's going on for the Americans? What does it seem like their motives are in the space race? Look at the Soviet pile category and decide what were the motives. Again, we do this in a Venn diagram. You can do it in a T-chart, have them write it down. For this particular activity, you could stop here. And here's where you could go back up to the supporting question and check what they've learned and use this as assessment. Why was the space race not really about space? Hopefully they should be able to talk about the fact that the Americans and the Soviets were in competition with each other. If you want to take it a step further, and I do encourage you that if you feel confident enough to do this, have them resort and reanalyze the primary sources, the set, into thematic categories. One for economic, one for social, and one for political. Now the American and Soviet points of view might overlap. So now you can see where economic motive is coming in, political motive is coming in, and social motives are coming in. And so it just takes it that step further. So here are 2 examples, one from the American point of view and one from the Soviet point of view. Again, you've got your source information, which tells you can see this one's Washington, D.C., Dwight Eisenhower, the White House. That should give students an idea, even just looking at this image, you see the American flag, that this is from the American point of view. Over here, we look at our source information. We see that, well, first of all, we see that Russian is written, it's in Russian. So that may be a clue there. But this also comes from the Museum of Cosmonautics in Moscow. And so you could use your primary source analysis tool here to help them analyze each primary source. You could do that what makes you say that strategy again to help them analyze the primary source. Either way, we want them to be thinking about what's different from the American point of view and what's different from the Soviet point of view. Again, I will point out that we're looking at the rise of mass media and television and technology. This is a televised event for Dwight Eisenhower here. You can see the lights in the background. You can see the reflection here. He's kind of set up to, you see the wires coming through, the microphones, and of course this is a nose to a missile. This, for the Soviets, is a piece of propaganda that says, in the name of peace. So, you know, then you've got she's pointing to the moon and she's pointing here, and then you have the rocket. So we kind of have a military point of view over here on the American side, where maybe we have more of a angle on for peace, but the other primary sources might cause students to question those motives. The third formative supporting task, and the last one, is about the civil rights movement. So we're coming kind of now, and we're looking more at home, and what's going on at home in the Cold War, during the Cold War. The question being here, how were television and other media used as a tool during the civil rights movement? The task or the strategy is going to be developing research questions to look at a primary source, to be able to, or a set of primary sources where students are going to try to corroborate evidence between those sources to answer their questions that they made. I want to spend a little time on the question formulation technique because this is one of my favorite inquiry strategies, which helps students develop research questions, or it can be just developing their own questions. It can help you develop questions. It's a great strategy all the way around, and it's from the Right Question Institute. If you're not familiar with the QFT question formulation technique or the Right Question Institute. We have a link for that. We will share it. Thank you, Sheila. And please check them out. Again, I will also follow up on a document, an email with this information. Ultimately, they're going to try to corroborate by analyzing their primary sources. So, question formulation technique always starts with a prompt. Your prompt can be a word, a phrase, a date. It could be a name. It could be an event. It could be a photograph. It can be a piece of artwork. It can be an artifact. It can be whatever you want. And you can use the QFT in any subject area. English, language, arts, math, art, science, any subject area, it will work. Now, the key to the QFT is following the rules. And here they are on the right-hand side. So this is our image, and I'm sorry, I left the source information off of this one, but this is our prompt. And you could always choose a different prompt for your students. There are other sources to choose from in this primary source set for the civil rights movement. You could choose, this is the prompt we've suggested. And you have students follow these questions, or I'm sorry, follow these rules. Making sure that they number everything they write down, every question they write down. You can have them do this as on their own. You can have them do this in a small group or even a whole group. So rule number one is to ask as many questions as you can. I like to give 1, 2, maybe 3 minutes, just depending on how much time we have and what we're doing, but encourage them to ask as many questions as you can. I like to maybe give my students a minimum number that they have to ask at least 5 questions or something, just so you know that they get to that point, because the more they have, the better it is. As they're writing their questions, you want to encourage them not to stop to discuss the question, make judgments on the question, or answer it. So any question is good. No, there are no bad questions. Don't worry about trying to answer the questions. No judgment of questions. No discussing of whether or not it's good or bad. Make sure they're writing it down. Make sure they write down every question as they state it. And then change any statements into questions. So for example, they might say, I see a camera. That's not a question, so that's a statement. We want them to change that to, why is there a camera? Or something like that. Hopefully they will write down plenty of questions, and here's where they can start to improve on their questions. Once you've gone through these 4 rules, they will improve on their questions. They will decide which questions they've written that are closed and which are open. Closed questions can be answered with 1 word or a yes or no. Open-ended questions require some explanation. Just to make sure students understand this process, I like to have them go in and change 1 closed question to open and vice versa. You can have them write a C next to every closed question and an O next to every open question so they know. You could have them change all of their questions to open if you want only open-ended questions for your activity. Of course, closed questions are fine too. Those are necessary. We have to know the answers to those sometimes as well. But I do tend to have my students operate with open-ended questions because the whole point is for them to find evidence to respond to them. Once they have improved their questions through closing and opening certain questions, then they will choose their top 3 priority questions. I always go with 3 because I like 3, it just seems to work, but you could narrow it down to 2. You could say choose your top priority question. I want to encourage students to make sure they know that they're going to have to answer these questions, or they're going to have to try to answer these questions. So there's something that is within their reach, but also something that they can do research about. So here's where our primary source analysis comes in for this task. They'll use the primary source sets for the civil rights movement to try to find evidence to answer their priority questions. This is why we call it corroborating evidence, because we want them to find evidence in more than 1 primary source. It's so important that students understand that 1 source is not enough to give us an answer. We need to find multiple sources that support that evidence to have a good answer. If students cannot answer all of their priority questions after analyzing the primary sources, you can always provide them with a secondary source, their textbook, a video, a children's book, an article, whatever, that they could actually do some research in. This technique is a great place to start. If you've never used inquiry, or maybe you've used inquiry before, but you kind of want to take it to that next level, this is a great place. You can again use that primary source analysis tool here to analyze each of the primary sources, or you can use any other strategy that helps with analysis. But as students analyze sources more often, they become used to it and they do it automatically, and you no longer have to take them through those basic steps of observing and reflecting. Okay, so the summative assessment would come next if you're going in order. And that's basically just building an argument to the compelling question. How was the Cold War shaped by television? I'm not going to get into all this. I just want to, because of time, but what I want to point out is that an evidence-based argument doesn't have to be written necessarily. It could be an oral argument. You could have them make a poster or a diagram. You could have them write an outline. You could have them draw a picture. You can think about this in a really creative way. I'm a very visual person. I like visuals from students. So, you know, having them create something visual to represent their thinking here would be great, just as great as having them write a, you know, essay or a short answer. Of course, we still have the taking informed action, which is very important because this is where students are going to use what they have just learned about and the skills that they've just practiced to apply them to something relevant to their lives today. So to understand the issues that we've been talking about, which is media, the rise of mass media and television and its impact, to look at the relevance and impact of issues today. Is that still an issue? Mass media and television or social media? Yes. And then act in a way that allows students to demonstrate the skills that they have developed. Understand, assess, and act is the basic part of a taking informed action. And so it's usually what they will be doing. So here we're saying that in order to do the taking informed action, it's a fact-checking activity where they would read a current event article from a news outlet. You could choose it, or you could have them choose one of their own, or it could be from the local newspaper. It could be whatever. They will assess by fact-checking the article, assessing bias with lateral reading, which I will talk about in just a moment. And then they will apply those skills by creating a report to explain their findings. So creating a report, basically a fact-checking report of an article that they've just read. That comes from today. What a great time right now to have students fact-checking articles and leading up to our election. So this strategy is lateral reading. If you're not familiar with this, it's exactly what it sounds like. Instead of reading top to bottom, it's reading across laterally. Basically, it's taking an article and opening up tabs online that are either linked in the article or where students will look up the information, like Google the author, open a tab, Google the author. Open another tab, Google the publisher, Google the website, whatever it is. Find out as much as you can about this article and about who wrote it, about why it was written, about who the audience is. We've given you a great resource to help you with this because I know this is a little bit hard to explain in our short amount of time. This art of reading laterally is linked on the student instructions on the website. It's also linked in your teacher guide. And that is just basically looking for the author, the reliability or the bias, and who is the intended audience. I love the idea of having students create a report. You could do this by doing a newscast or writing an article or creating a newspaper of some kind, but ultimately having students looking at the media in a critical way, not just taking it in, but being that critical thinker to look at the media and become more attuned to what's in front of them every day. So as we know, with the rise of the Cold War, mass media and television really changes the world. It changes what Americans are able to see. It changes the fact that they can be on the ground in Vietnam. They can see what's going on in southern states during the civil rights movement. And they can see, it also fueled that competition with the Soviets in the space race. And so media is so important. It is even arguably more important to our lives today because there is so much of it. So that's why we've included this taking informed action. And I love this as a standalone as well. You do not necessarily have to do all of the previous activities. Okay, so I am now to the end of my presentation. We now have I want to talk a little bit about our upcoming events for GHF, and then I will open up the floor to any kind of questions that we have. So first up, next Tuesday, we have another free teacher webinar that is going to be, it is a special collaboration between us, the Georgia Historical Society, and the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, where we're going to be taking a deep dive into the roles of women and girls during the civil rights movement and present strategies for examining art and primary source historical documents. So we're going to be looking at an exhibit from the High Museum, which is about it's called Picturing the Dream. It's illustrations from children's books from the civil rights movement. And we will be presenting you with the art, and then I will present you with primary sources and how to use that art as a hook, as a way of bringing your students to studying and learning from primary sources. And that should be really fun. And that's at 4 o'clock on Zoom. On Tuesday, November 3rd, that's next Tuesday. And we have the link for that as well, and we will follow up with that link in email. On the right-hand side, we have some virtual public programs. So these are really more adult-friendly programs. And this is, you know, not necessarily a webinar, but just we are not doing our programs obviously in person. So this is how we are doing them this fall. We have the Cold War and the Civil Rights Movement coming up. With Kevin Gaines, and this is in partnership with UVA, the UVA Club of Savannah. And he will be talking about the civil rights movement during the Cold War. And then we have Grace Hale, who will also be a professor at UVA, who will be talking about the Cold War and popular culture. And those are coming up later in November and then December as well. And you can find that information at the Georgia History Festival .org website. Okay. So I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen, or maybe I'll leave it up and see what Sheila has any questions in case I need to go back to any slides. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any questions at the moment. So if there's anything that you'd like to ask before we go, if you need a link to anything or any kind of questions, just let us know. You're welcome. You're very welcome. And please come back. We will have some more webinars in January as well. We'll be doing historical investigations for Georgia leaders of the late 20th century, people like Jimmy Carter, Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, and Richard Russell, who are all named in the standards, the Georgia standards. And we will have some more resources on media literacy coming out this fall as well. You know, just stay tuned because we will have a lot coming for you. So if you have any questions, again, I'm Lisa Landers, and I'm going to put my email back up on the screen very quickly. If you email me or call the education department at GHS, you will get me and I will respond to your questions. If you have need any help, have any questions, I am happy to be there for you. Awesome. Yes, please watch out for the media literacy content because that will be coming. We're also doing a new series with Dr. Stan Deaton, if you're familiar with Today in Georgia History. He is the face of Today in Georgia History, and we're going to be doing a series, some Q&A with him that talks about the rise of media during the Cold War, and we're going to be soliciting questions from students. If you are not already receiving my our education newsletter, that is a great way to stay up to date. I will include that in our follow-up information, but you can find that on the For Educators page on the GHS website, which is georgiahistory.com. Please sign up for our newsletter. It will give you up-to-date information on everything we have going on. And again, please feel free to contact me anytime.